I knew something was wrong the moment Matthew Cross's assistant appeared at my cubicle. She never came down to the third floor unless someone was getting called upstairs for something serious. Her expression gave nothing away, but the way she avoided eye contact told me everything I needed to know. Lily, Matthew wants to see you in conference room B. Now. I saved my work, closed my laptop and followed her to the elevator. My hand stayed steady. Whatever was coming, I'd deal with it the same way I dealt with everything else at Cascade Solutions. Calmly, efficiently, without showing weakness. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Matthew sat at the head of the table with his arms crossed. Next to him was Derek Stone, our operations director, wearing the kind of smirk that made you want to wipe it off his face. A manila folder sat between them. "Close the door," Matthew said without looking at me. I shut it and took the seat across from them. Nobody offered me water. Nobody asked how my day was going. This wasn't that kind of meeting. Matthew slid a printed photograph across the table. The image quality was terrible, clearly taken from a distance with a phone camera, but there I was walking into a building downtown last Thursday evening. I was wearing my gray blazer, the one I kept in my car for client meetings. Care to explain this? Matthew tapped the photo with his index finger like he was presenting evidence in court. I looked at the picture, then back at him. What exactly am I explaining? You're moonlighting. Derek leaned forward, clearly enjoying this. You signed a non-compete agreement when you started here. Section 7, paragraph 3. No outside consulting work without written approval. I stayed quiet. Let them fill the silence with their accusations. Matthew's jaw tightened. We've built this department around you, Lily. Given you opportunities, resources, flexibility. And this is how you repay us. By working for someone else. I haven't worked for anyone else, I said evenly. Then what were you doing in that building? Derek pressed. I could have explained. Could have walked them through exactly what that meeting was and why it had nothing to do with their paranoia. But something in Matthew's expression told me the truth wouldn't matter here. They'd already made up their minds. You violated your employment contract, Matthew continued. Whether you want to admit it or not, we have grounds for immediate termination. HR has already been notified. I sat back in my chair and looked at both of them. Matthew trying to play the disappointed leader. Derek practically vibrating with satisfaction. Neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. All right, I said calmly. You're right. Matthew blinked. Excuse me. I stood up and reached into my pocket, pulling out my employee badge and company credit card. I placed both on the table between us. You're absolutely right, I repeated. One job is enough. I should focus. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Derek's smirk faltered. Matthew opened his mouth but no words came out. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Matthew's chair scrape against the floor. Wait, Lily, hang on. But I was already in the hallway. Security met me at my desk 10 minutes later. 2 guys from building services who looked uncomfortable about the whole thing. They stood back while I packed up my belongings, which didn't take long. A coffee mug from my college graduation. A small succulent plant that had somehow survived 3 years under fluorescent lights. A notebook filled with system diagrams and process flows that nobody else in the building understood. As I zipped my bag, I glanced up at Matthew's office. He stood at the window looking down at me, phone pressed to his ear, probably already calling someone to explain what just happened. I didn't wave. Didn't acknowledge him at all. Just slung my bag over my shoulder and walked out. By the time I reached the parking garage, I'd already stopped thinking about that place. 4 years earlier, Matthew Cross had offered me a position over lunch at an upscale bistro downtown. I was working at a small digital marketing firm in the suburbs at the time, doing solid work but hitting the ceiling fast. My ideas kept getting shelved. My proposals disappeared into committee meetings that never resulted in action. Matthew made Cascade Solutions sound like the answer to everything I'd been frustrated about. We're building something special here, he said, leaning forward with that intense eye contact he used when he wanted you to feel chosen. I need someone who can see the bigger picture. Someone who understands data architecture, client psychology, and strategic positioning. You've got all 3. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter with a salary that made my current position look like an internship. You'll be the lead strategist for our enterprise division. Full autonomy to build the department however you see fit. I want innovation, Lily. I want systems that make our competitors wonder what the hell we're doing right. It sounded like everything I'd been working toward. A chance to finally implement the frameworks I'd been sketching in notebooks for years. Real resources. Real authority. Real impact. I gave my notice that same afternoon. My first week at Cascade Solutions felt like stepping into a different world. The office had exposed brick walls, standing desks, a coffee bar with an actual barista. The team was small but talented. Developers who knew their craft. Analysts who asked good questions. Account managers who actually understood the products they were selling. I started mapping out a complete overhaul of our client onboarding system. The existing process was clunky and inconsistent. Every account manager had their own approach, which meant clients got wildly different experiences depending on who they worked with. I proposed a standardized framework with built-in checkpoints, automated reminders, and clear escalation protocols. The team was skeptical at first. Change always meets resistance. But once they saw the workflow speeding up and clients responding positively, they started buying in. By month 3, Matthew called a budget meeting. Revenue's down, he announced, even though our client retention numbers were the highest they'd been in 2 years. We need to trim some fat. He laid off 2 of my analysts. Both were strong performers who understood the systems we were building. I pushed back hard. These aren't fat, Matthew. They're infrastructure. We're already stretched thin covering the accounts we have. You'll figure it out, he said with that easy confidence of someone who never had to do the actual work. You're my problem solver. By month 7, another team member quit. She was burned out from picking up the slack, tired of doing 3 jobs while Matthew kept promising we'd hire replacements that never materialized. I brought it up in every leadership meeting. Every time Matthew had the same response. Budget's tight right now. We'll reassess next quarter. So I started doing everything myself. I'd be debugging a client dashboard in the morning, then jumping on a strategy call in the afternoon, then covering account management duties in the evening because nobody else had the bandwidth. I wrote proposals, built presentations, managed vendor relationships, and troubleshot technical issues that should have gone to our IT department if we'd had one that was properly staffed. Most nights I didn't leave the office before 8. Weekends stopped existing. If I didn't come in on Saturday, I'd spend all day Monday trying to catch up. I remember one particularly brutal week in September. We had a major client launch scheduled, but our development team was underwater with bug fixes from a previous rollout. I ended up doing the QA testing myself, staying until midnight 3 nights in a row to make sure everything worked before the client presentation. When the launch went perfectly, Matthew sent a company-wide email praising the team's dedication and collaborative spirit. No mention of who actually pulled it off. No acknowledgement of the hours or the nights or the personal plans I'd canceled. That's when I started understanding what I really was to him. Not a valued team member. Not a strategic partner. Just a convenient solution to problems he didn't want to solve properly. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Because despite everything, I was building something real. The systems I'd designed were working. Clients were happy. Our processes were getting noticed in the industry. I kept thinking if I just held on a little longer, Matthew would recognize what we'd accomplished and finally invest in the infrastructure we needed. He never did. Every time I presented him with data showing we were understaffed, he'd nod thoughtfully and say we'd circle back to it. Every time I flagged a system vulnerability that needed addressing, he'd tell me to put a band-aid on it for now. The band-aids became my specialty. I built workarounds on top of workarounds, held together with manual processes and spreadsheets and sheer force of will. It worked but barely. Then December hit and everything started unraveling. Clients began reporting issues with our analytics dashboard. Numbers weren't matching up. Reports were showing incorrect data. At first I thought it was user error, but then I started seeing patterns. The same discrepancies appearing across multiple accounts. The same calculation errors showing up in different contexts. I couldn't sleep. I spent 4 days straight digging through our entire data pipeline, checking every integration point, every API call, every transformation rule. The office was empty by the time I found it. One of our third-party vendors had updated their API without proper documentation. The changes broke our data mapping protocol in subtle ways that only became obvious when you looked at aggregate results. If we hadn't caught it, we would have been giving clients bad intelligence for strategic decisions. The liability alone could have destroyed us. I fixed it. Rebuilt the entire integration from scratch. Wrote new validation rules. Created monitoring alerts so we'd catch similar issues in the future. Then I documented everything in a detailed report for Matthew. His response was an email thanking me for catching that little hiccup, and a $50 gift card to a coffee shop. A little hiccup. 4 days of my life. Hundreds of hours of work across months building the systems that let me catch it in the first place. All reduced to a pat on the head and enough money for a week's worth of lattes. The next day Matthew pulled up to the office in a new Tesla. Fully loaded. Custom paint. When I saw it in the parking garage, something inside me cracked. I cornered him in his office that afternoon with every piece of documentation I'd ever created. Staff utilization reports. System architecture diagrams. Client satisfaction metrics. Budget projections showing exactly what we'd need to scale properly. He scrolled through maybe 2 slides before cutting me off. Lily, I appreciate the thoroughness, but we've been through this. Let's revisit it after Q1. After Q1. The same thing he'd said after Q2, Q3, and Q4 the previous year. My hands were shaking when I left his office. Not from anger. From the realization that nothing I did would ever be enough to make him actually invest in what we were building. He wanted the results without the resources. The innovation without the infrastructure. The success without the cost. I started having trouble sleeping. My shoulders were constantly tight. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with my mind racing through tasks I'd forgotten to complete. My doctor mentioned something about stress management during my annual checkup. I nodded and didn't bring it up again. Then came the industry conference in Cleveland. I almost didn't go. Matthew had forgotten to approve the expense report until the last minute and I had to fight for it. But I needed to get out of the office, needed to remember there was a whole industry beyond Cascade Solutions. That's where I met Dr. Evelyn Park. She was leading a workshop on organizational psychology and digital transformation. The room was packed. I grabbed a seat near the back and expected another generic presentation about synergy and paradigm shifts. Instead, she talked about something I'd never heard anyone address directly: the invisible architecture that holds modern companies together. The people who create systems, maintain institutional knowledge, and bridge gaps that nobody else sees. And what happens when organizations fail to recognize that invisible work. During the Q&A, I asked about strategies for documenting tribal knowledge in rapidly scaling companies. Most presenters would have given a vague answer about knowledge management software and moved on. Evelyn stopped, looked right at me, asked what I was working with. We ended up talking for 40 minutes after the session ended. She wanted to know about the systems I'd built, the challenges I was facing, the gaps I was trying to fill. She didn't just nod along politely. She asked follow-up questions that showed she actually understood what I was describing. "You're describing a classic pattern," she said finally. "You've become the human glue holding together something that should be held together by proper infrastructure. That's not sustainable." "I know," I admitted. "But I don't see a way out that doesn't mean abandoning what I've built." She handed me her card. "I run a research institute focused on organizational resilience. We're looking for practitioners who can help us understand these patterns from the inside. Would you be interested in being interviewed for a case study? Completely confidential, no company names used." It wasn't a job offer. Just an opportunity to contribute to research that might actually help other people avoid the trap I was in. I said yes. That weekend, I sat in my apartment staring at her card and realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, someone in my industry had looked at what I did and seen it as valuable knowledge worth studying. Not just work to be extracted. Not just problems to be solved. Actual expertise worth respecting. The following Tuesday, Evelyn sent me a calendar invite for a video call. Just an initial interview, she explained. 60 to 90 minutes talking about my work. Nothing formal. I took the call from my living room on a Saturday morning. Wore a decent shirt, made sure my background looked professional. Expected a structured interview with prepared questions. Instead, Evelyn pulled up a whiteboard and started asking me to diagram the systems I'd built. How did information flow through our organization? Where were the bottlenecks? What happened when key people were out sick or on vacation? I found myself drawing everything out. The dependencies. The workarounds. The places where one person's absence would cause cascading failures. It was like finally being able to show someone the invisible scaffolding I'd been holding up. "This is remarkable," Evelyn said when I finished. "You've essentially built a parallel operating system running underneath the official organizational structure." "I wouldn't call it remarkable. I'd call it exhausting." She laughed. "Both can be true." By the end of the call, she'd made an offer. "We're launching a consulting division, working with companies to identify and strengthen these invisible systems before they fail. I need practitioners who've lived this, who understand it from the inside. Would you consider consulting with us? We can work completely remote. We'd pay standard industry rates." The number she mentioned was 3 times my hourly rate at Cascade Solutions. What would I be doing exactly? Helping companies map their knowledge dependencies, identifying critical personnel risks, designing transition strategies. The same things you've been doing instinctively, but for organizations that actually want to fix these problems before they explode. I should have hesitated. Should have worried about conflicts of interest or non-compete clauses. But sitting there in my apartment, finally having someone recognize the value of what I'd been doing, I couldn't find a reason to say no. "I'm in." "Excellent. I'll send over the paperwork. First project starts next weekend if you're available." I was available. More than that, I was ready. The paperwork came through on Wednesday. Clean contract, clear scope, nothing that touched my work at Cascade Solutions. I'd be consulting on organizational systems for companies in completely different industries. No client conflicts. No proprietary information. Just applying what I'd learned about how systems fail and how to prevent it. I kept both jobs completely separate. Weekdays belonged to Matthew and Cascade Solutions. I'd be in the office by 8, leave by 7 or 8, handle everything I'd always handled. Weekends belonged to Evelyn's institute. I'd take video calls from my apartment, review documentation, build frameworks, and actually get to solve problems the right way instead of just patching over them. The difference was staggering. At Cascade, I'd spend hours explaining why we needed to document critical processes, only to be told we'd get to it later. At the institute, documentation was the foundation. They understood that knowledge needed to be captured, shared, and systematized. At Cascade, suggesting we hire more staff was seen as not being a team player. At the institute, they asked me to calculate exactly how many people we'd need and what roles they should fill. At Cascade, I was a cost center to be minimized. At the institute, I was an expert to be leveraged. For the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to work for people who actually valued expertise over exploitation. I was careful. Never touched my laptop during work hours. Never took calls in the office. Never mentioned the institute to anyone at Cascade. The work stayed completely compartmentalized. But I stopped caring whether Matthew noticed what I was contributing. Stopped hoping for recognition that would never come. The institute gave me something Cascade never had. Proof that what I did actually mattered to people who understood its value. Then came that Friday in March. Cold day. Rain coming down in sheets. I parked 3 blocks from Evelyn's downtown office like I always did. Pulled my hood up, kept my head down, walked through the weather to our scheduled meeting. It was supposed to be a routine check-in. New project debrief. 60 minutes maximum. I signed in at the lobby, took the elevator to the 7th floor, and spent an hour reviewing organizational charts with Evelyn and 2 of her senior consultants. Professional. Unremarkable. Completely legitimate. I didn't know someone had followed me. Didn't know anyone had taken a photo of me walking into the building. Didn't know that photo would land on Matthew's desk by Monday morning. When his assistant showed up at my cube on Tuesday, I genuinely had no idea what was coming. But sitting in that conference room watching Matthew slide that grainy photograph across the table, I understood immediately. Someone had been watching. Someone had reported back. And Matthew had decided this was his smoking gun. He never asked what I was actually doing in that building. Never requested an explanation of what the meeting was about. Just jumped straight to accusations and termination. Part of me wanted to defend myself. Pull out the contract, show him there was no conflict, explain that everything I'd done was completely above board. But looking at his face, at Derek's satisfied smirk, I realized they didn't care about the truth. They'd made up their minds. And honestly, I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd never valued me in the first place. So when I stood up and placed my badge on the table, when I said one job was enough, I meant it. Just not the job they thought. I was in my car when Evelyn's message came through. We'd like to make the consulting position full-time. I've got an offer being prepared now. Can we talk tomorrow? I sat there in the parking garage with rain hammering on the roof of my car. Everything I'd built at Cascade Solutions was behind me. Every system, every process, every band-aid holding their operation together. And I felt nothing but relief. I typed back 3 words. Let's discuss terms. Monday morning I walked into Evelyn's office building wearing my best interview suit. But this wasn't an interview. This was a negotiation. She met me in their main conference room with her chief operating officer and head of research. Coffee and pastries on the table. Actual effort put into making me feel welcome. We want you to lead our consulting practice, Evelyn said directly. Build the methodology, train the team, develop the frameworks. Everything you've been doing instinctively, we want to turn into a repeatable system. The COO slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter with a base salary that made my Cascade Solutions paycheck look like pocket change. Plus equity. Plus performance bonuses tied to successful client outcomes. We're serious about building this right, Evelyn continued. That means hiring properly, documenting thoroughly, and actually listening when our lead consultant says we need something. I looked at the 3 of them. No smirks. No hidden agendas. Just people who understood what they were building and wanted someone who could help them build it well. When do you want me to start? Yesterday, the COO said with a slight smile. But we'll settle for next Monday. I signed the offer that afternoon. That evening I got a text from Amelia Warren, one of my former colleagues at Cascade. We'd been friendly but not close. She'd been smart enough to keep her head down and stay out of office politics. Holy shit, Lily. What did you do? Everything's falling apart. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. What do you mean? The client dashboard crashed this morning. Nobody knows how to fix it. Matthew's been in emergency meetings all day. Derek tried to reboot the system and made it worse. We've got 3 major clients screaming about missing data. I could picture it exactly. The dashboard was held together with custom scripts and manual processes that I'd documented thoroughly. But documentation only works if people actually read it. Did anyone check the troubleshooting guide I wrote? What guide? Of course. The documentation I'd spent weeks creating, stored in the shared drive I'd organized, that nobody had bothered to look at because they'd always just come to me instead. Never mind, I typed back. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But I knew they wouldn't. Not quickly. Not without understanding the entire system architecture underneath. That dashboard wasn't just a piece of software. It was the end result of dozens of integrated processes, each one dependent on the others, each one requiring specific knowledge to maintain. Knowledge that had just walked out the door. Tuesday morning my phone started ringing. Matthew's number. Then Derek's. Then the main office line. Then Amelia again. I let them all go to voicemail. I was sitting in Evelyn's office going through new hire paperwork when the emails started coming through. First from Matthew, subject line, urgent, need your help. Then from Derek, quick question about dashboard. Then from their VP of operations, someone I'd barely ever spoken to, can we discuss consulting arrangement? I deleted them all without responding. Trouble from the old job? Evelyn asked, noticing my expression. They're realizing some things. Good. Let them realize it the hard way. By Wednesday, Amelia sent me a longer message. Lily, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but it's bad. Really bad. The dashboard is still down. We've lost access to 3 major data integrations. The client onboarding system is throwing errors nobody understands. Matthew's talking about hiring an emergency consultant, but nobody knows what they'd even be consulting on because we can't explain how anything works. I read it twice. Felt nothing. I know this isn't fair to ask, but could you at least point us in the right direction? People are panicking. I thought about responding. Thought about being the bigger person, helping them out, showing I wasn't vindictive. Then I thought about 4 years of being understaffed, overworked, and undervalued. 4 years of band-aids and workarounds and promises that never materialized. 4 years of being treated like a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be respected. I put my phone away and got back to work. At my new job, I was designing frameworks for how to actually build sustainable systems. Documenting knowledge. Creating redundancies. Training teams properly. All the things I'd begged Matthew to let me do at Cascade. By Thursday, the voicemails were getting desperate. Matthew's voice had lost its commanding tone. Now he sounded tired. Lily, please call me back. We need to talk about what's happening. I think we may have been too hasty on Tuesday. Can we discuss terms for you to return? Derek left a message that was almost funny in its transparency. Hey Lily, it's Derek. Listen, we may have overreacted about the consulting thing. Matthew wants to have a conversation about bringing you back. We're prepared to be flexible on the terms. Flexible. That was corporate speak for, we're desperate and we'll pay whatever it takes. The VP of Operations left the most telling message. Miss Preston, this is Henry Wallace from Cascade Solutions. I understand there may have been a misunderstanding regarding your departure. We'd very much like to discuss a consulting arrangement to help transition your responsibilities. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Money is not an object. Money is not an object. The same company that couldn't find budget to hire adequate staff suddenly had unlimited funds. Friday afternoon, a formal letter arrived via courier. Overnight express. Return to sender marked urgent. Inside was a remarkably polite letter from Cascade Solutions legal department requesting my assistance with knowledge transfer and system documentation for a mutually agreeable consulting rate. They were scared. Not just worried. Actually scared about what might happen if they couldn't restore the systems I'd built. Evelyn found me reading the letter in our break room. They're offering you money to fix it? Consulting rates. To help with the transition. Are you going to do it? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Part of me wanted to be professional, to help them stabilize things even though they'd treated me like garbage. Part of me felt guilty about the people still working there who'd never done anything wrong. But a bigger part of me remembered Matthew's face when he'd slid that photograph across the table. The certainty in his voice when he'd accused me of betrayal. The complete absence of interest in hearing my side of the story. No, I said finally. They made their choice. They can live with it. Evelyn nodded. Good. They don't deserve your expertise. That weekend I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Miss Preston? This is Charlotte Reeves. I'm the regional director overseeing Cascade Solutions. Higher up the chain than Matthew. Interesting. I'm aware of the circumstances of your departure, and I want you to know that situation is being addressed internally. Both Matthew Cross and Derek Stone are under review. That's nice to hear, I said neutrally. I'm calling because we're in crisis mode. We've lost access to critical systems. Client relationships are deteriorating. We need expert help to stabilize operations, and you're the only person who fully understands how everything works. I documented everything thoroughly. It's all in the shared drive. We've reviewed your documentation. It's excellent. But the systems you built were more complex than anyone realized. We need someone who can see the whole picture. I let the silence stretch out. We're prepared to offer consulting rates of $8,000 per hour, with a minimum commitment of 20 hours. All remote work. You'd never have to set foot in the office. $8,000 per hour. For work I used to do for a fraction of that while being treated like I was disposable. $10,000, I said calmly. 20-hour minimum. Payment up front. And I only deal with you directly. Nobody else from that company contacts me. Silence on her end. Then, done. I'll have contracts sent over within the hour. One more condition. Yes. I want a written acknowledgement from Matthew Cross accepting full responsibility for the situation and formally apologizing for the termination. Not for me. For the record. Another pause. I'll see what I can do. Then we don't have a deal. Fine. You'll have it. Can you start tomorrow? Monday. After the payment clears. The money hit my account Sunday night. $200,000. More than I'd made in an entire year at Cascade Solutions, for 20 hours of consulting work. The written apology from Matthew came through at the same time. Formal. Legal reviewed. But there in writing. Acknowledgement that the termination had been premature and based on incomplete information, and that my contributions to the company had been substantially undervalued. I saved it in 3 separate places. Monday morning, I logged into a video call with Charlotte and 2 of Cascade's senior engineers. Not Matthew. Not Derek. People who actually needed to understand what they were working with. All right, I said, pulling up a screen share. Let's start with why everything's broken. For the next 4 hours I walked them through the architecture I'd built. The dependencies they'd never seen. The processes I'd maintained manually because nobody would approve automation tools. The workarounds I'd implemented to keep things running despite chronic understaffing. One of the engineers, a guy named Paul who'd been there almost as long as I had, kept shaking his head. Jesus, Lily. I had no idea you were holding this much together. Nobody did. That was the problem. We worked methodically through each broken system. I didn't fix anything myself. Instead, I taught them how to fix it, how to maintain it, and how to prevent it from breaking again. You need to hire at least 3 more people, I told Charlotte bluntly. 2 analysts and a dedicated operations manager. These systems can't be maintained by one person working overtime. That's how you ended up in this mess. Already approved, she said. We're interviewing this week. By Wednesday, they'd restored most of the critical functionality. The dashboard was back online. The data integrations were stable. The client onboarding system was processing requests normally. You've got maybe 70% of what you need, I told them on our final call. The rest is going to take time and ongoing maintenance. Don't let it slide back into crisis mode. We won't, Charlotte promised. And Lily, thank you for helping despite everything. I nodded and ended the call. 20 hours of consulting. $200,000. And the satisfaction of watching them finally understand what they'd lost. 3 months later, I stood on a stage at an industry conference in Boston addressing 250 people. The presentation was titled Invisible Architecture: How Organizations Fail Without Knowing Why. I walked them through case studies drawn from my work at the Institute. Companies that had collapsed because they'd relied on tribal knowledge without documenting it. Organizations that had burned out key employees and then wondered why everything fell apart. Systems held together by single points of failure that nobody had recognized until it was too late. I didn't mention Cascade Solutions by name. Didn't need to. Everyone in that room had either lived through something similar or watched it happen to someone else. The pattern is always the same, I told them. An organization finds someone who can see the whole system. Someone who can bridge gaps, solve problems, and make things work despite structural issues. And instead of strengthening the structure, they just load more weight onto that person until they break. Front row, 3rd seat from the left, sat Amelia Warren from my old team. She'd reached out a month ago asking if we could talk. Said she was thinking about leaving Cascade. I'd bought her coffee and given her the advice I wished someone had given me years earlier. Your expertise has value, and if your current employer doesn't recognize that, someone else will. She'd applied to join the Institute's consulting team. Made it through 3 rounds of interviews. Started 2 weeks ago. I wrapped up the presentation with one final point. The solution isn't finding better heroes who can hold more weight. It's building systems that don't require heroes in the first place. Proper staffing. Clear documentation. Sustainable processes. Respect for expertise. It's not complicated. It's just hard for organizations to prioritize until they've already failed. The room erupted in applause. Not polite conference clapping. Real recognition from people who'd lived through what I was describing. Backstage afterward, Evelyn found me reviewing notes for the afternoon workshop. That was phenomenal, she said. We've already had 6 companies reach out about consulting engagements. Good. Maybe we can prevent a few disasters. Also, I just got an interesting email. Cascade Solutions wants to hire us to do a full operational assessment. I looked up. Matthew's company? They're under new management now. Charlotte Reeves is the interim CEO. She wants us to review their entire operational structure and make recommendations. What did you tell her? That I'd ask my lead consultant if she was interested. I thought about it. Walking back into that company even as an outside expert. Seeing the systems I'd built and the changes they'd made. Facing people who'd watched me get fired and done nothing. Counteroffer, I said. We'll do it, but I'm not the lead consultant. Amelia is. She knows the environment. He's got the skills. And she deserves the opportunity. Evelyn smiled. Done. I'll let Charlotte know. 2 weeks later, Amelia sent me a photo. She was standing in Cascade Solutions conference room, whiteboard behind her covered in system diagrams, leading a presentation for the entire leadership team. The message underneath read, "This feels incredible. Thank you for the chance." 6 months after that, I got an invitation to speak at a major industry summit in San Francisco. The topic was organizational resilience and they wanted me to keynote. The invitation came with a note from the conference organizer. Your work on invisible systems has changed how we think about organizational structure. We'd be honored to have you open the summit. I accepted. The morning of the keynote, I stood backstage watching the room fill up. 1,200 people. Industry leaders, consultants, academics, practitioners. All there to talk about how to build better organizations. And in the third row, halfway back on the right side, I spotted Matthew Cross. He'd been let go from Cascade Solutions 4 months after I left. Charlotte had cleaned house once she'd seen the full extent of how the company had been mismanaged. He was working somewhere else now, some smaller firm. I'd heard through the industry grapevine that he'd lasted 3 months before they'd started having problems. I could have changed my presentation. Could have made it less pointed, less direct. Could have avoided making him uncomfortable. Instead, I walked out on that stage and delivered the most uncompromising version of my message I'd ever given. The organizations that fail, I told the room, are the ones that mistake extraction for management. That confuse overwork with dedication. That treat expertise as a renewable resource that can be exploited indefinitely without consequence. I clicked to the next slide. A graph showing the correlation between employee burnout and system failures. When you burn out your experts, you don't just lose people. You lose the invisible knowledge that holds everything together. And by the time you realize,